Manhattan in October carried a particular kind of chill. Not the brutal cold of winter, but a crisp reminder that warmth was temporary. Along Fifth Avenue, headlights slid like liquid pearls, and the glass facade of the Astor Regent Hotel shimmered under a canopy of gold light. Inside, the annual Halcyon Publishing Gala unfolded with rehearsed elegance. Waiters gliding with champagne, laughter calibrated for influence, conversations polished to a sheen. Nathaniel Cross arrived without fanfare, though his presence bent the atmosphere all the same. Wealth had a gravity to it, invisible yet undeniable. He moved through the ballroom with the composure of someone long accustomed to being watched, his tailored black suit severe against the soft glow of chandeliers. Investors, editors, and minor celebrities orbited him, each exchange a ritual of nods and measured smiles. He was listening to a senior partner discuss market expansions when his attention fractured not by sound but by stillness. Near the far edge of the room, partially obscured by a marble column, stood a woman who did not belong to the choreography of the evening. She wore a simple navy dress, unadorned, her dark hair resting loosely over her shoulders. While others leaned, gestured, performed, she simply observed. A glass of champagne remained untouched in her hand, as though she had accepted it out of politeness rather than desire. Nathaniel's gaze lingered longer than courtesy allowed. "Nathaniel?" He blinked, the partner's voice pulling him back. "I'm sorry, you were saying?" But the thread of conversation had dissolved. The room, moments ago predictable, now felt subtly rearranged. Across the ballroom, Evelyn Harper shifted her weight, unaware of the disruption she had caused. She had almost declined the invitation. Galas were not her habitat. As a senior fiction editor at Halcyon, she preferred manuscripts to crowds, margins to microphones. Yet professional obligation and a gentle insistence from her colleague Clara had brought her here. "You look like you're attending your own sentencing," Clara had teased earlier. "I just don't understand how networking requires this much glitter," Evelyn replied. Now, standing alone, she traced the room with a reader's instinct, constructing silent narratives about strangers. The tech mogul laughing too loudly, the poet affecting indifference, the philanthropist whose smile never touched his eyes. And then there was the man approaching her. Nathaniel did not hurry. He navigated the space with deliberate ease, ignoring the flickers of recognition in others' expressions. Up close, Evelyn noticed the details the magazines never captured. The faint fatigue beneath his eyes, the restraint in his posture, the absence of arrogance. "Enjoying the evening?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost wry. Evelyn offered a polite smile. "I'm observing it. Is that different?" "For an editor? Always." Something like amusement touched his face. "Nathaniel Cross. I know," she said, then immediately regretted the bluntness. "Sorry." "That sounded statistically inevitable," he suggested. She laughed softly, tension dissolving by a degree. "Evelyn Harper." He repeated her name, not as a social reflex, but as if committing it to memory. Around them, the gala pulsed music, crystal, the hum of ambition, yet a pocket of quiet seemed to form in their shared space. "What would an observer write about this room?" Nathaniel asked. Evelyn tilted her head, considering. "Loneliness, mostly." The answer caught him off guard. "That's a bleak assessment." "Not bleak. Human." For a moment, neither spoke. The orchestra's strings swelled into a familiar jazz standard, and couples drifted toward the dance floor. Nathaniel glanced at them, then back at Evelyn. "There you are," she said, slipping her hand into his arm. Nathaniel's posture adjusted almost imperceptibly. Victoria's gaze moved to Evelyn, curiosity sharpened by instinct. "And you are?" "Evelyn Harper, Halcyon." "Ah, one of the minds behind the masterpieces." Victoria's smile was flawless. "Nathaniel speaks highly of the company." It was a gracious line, expertly delivered, yet something cold flickered beneath it. Nathaniel looked at Evelyn, a glance too brief for interpretation, yet too weighted to be meaningless. "It was a pleasure," he said. "Of course," Evelyn replied. But as he allowed himself to be guided away, something unfamiliar pressed against his chest. Not desire, not yet, but the unmistakable awareness of a shift. Across the ballroom, Evelyn watched the crowd swallow him, her untouched champagne trembling slightly in her hand. Outside, Manhattan breathed in neon and wind, indifferent to the fragile beginnings of human catastrophe. The city did not remember faces, only patterns. 3 days after the gala, Manhattan resumed its indifferent rhythm, swallowing confessions, secrets, and passing impulses beneath the roar of traffic and ambition. Yet Nathaniel Cross found his thoughts drifting back to a quiet corner of a ballroom and a woman who had spoken of loneliness as if it were a shared language rather than an accusation. He told himself it was curiosity. On Thursday evening, rain glazed the streets in silver reflections, turning headlights into blurred constellations. Nathaniel dismissed his driver 2 blocks from Halcyon Publishing's Midtown office, ignoring the puzzled glance in the rearview mirror. The decision felt trivial, almost accidental, the kind a man could later deny to himself. Inside the lobby, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished stone. Employees lingered in subdued clusters, the workday reluctantly loosening its grip. Nathaniel stood near a display of newly released titles, pretending to examine a novel whose summary he did not read. He heard her before he saw her. "I'm not saying the ending is wrong," Evelyn was saying, her voice threaded with gentle patience. "I'm saying it's dishonest." Nathaniel turned. She stood beside a young assistant editor, sleeves rolled slightly, her dark hair gathered into a loose knot. Without the gala's formal distance, she appeared more real, more unguarded. There was no champagne now, no chandelier light, only fluorescent stillness and the quiet authority of someone defending an invisible truth. The assistant noticed Nathaniel first, words dissolving mid-sentence. Evelyn followed the shift in attention and froze for half a breath. "Mr. Cross," she said, surprise soft but unmistakable. "Nathaniel," he corrected, the name feeling less performative here. "I was nearby." It was an absurd lie. Both of them recognized it. Evelyn's eyes flickered with something between amusement and caution. Midtown isn't exactly a coincidence-friendly neighborhood for billionaires. I like to challenge statistical inevitabilities. The assistant, sensing an atmosphere not meant for her, mumbled an excuse and retreated. Silence settled, carrying none of the gala's noise, only the hum of distant elevators and the rain ticking softly against glass. "What brings you here?" Evelyn asked. "Books," he said, then, after a beat, "and perhaps conversation." She studied him, as though evaluating a manuscript whose genre remained uncertain. "Conversation is rarely what people mean." "And yet," Nathaniel replied, "I meant it." Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, reluctance, the fragile awareness of a line neither had agreed to approach. Evelyn glanced toward the elevators. "I was just leaving. May I walk you?" The question hovered with dangerous politeness. After a moment, she nodded. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, the city wrapped in a damp, shimmering haze. They walked without urgency, their steps unconsciously aligned. Nathaniel, accustomed to negotiations measured in millions, found himself unsettled by the absence of agenda. "You make a habit of appearing unexpectedly?" Evelyn asked. "Only recently." "That sounds like the beginning of a poor decision." "Most interesting things do." She exhaled a quiet laugh, though her gaze remained forward. "You realize this is how scandals begin." "I haven't done anything scandalous. Not yet." The words lingered, neither flirtation nor warning, but something more precarious. They reached a small independent bookstore tucked between a cafe and a tailor, the kind of place Manhattan preserved like a secret. Warm light spilled through fogged windows, illuminating handwritten staff recommendations and uneven stacks of hardcovers. Evelyn hesitated. "This is my refuge," she said, almost apologetically. Nathaniel looked at the modest storefront, then at her. "May I?" Inside, the world shifted. The city's velocity dissolved into the muted intimacy of turning pages and hushed voices. Nathaniel moved slowly, fingertips grazing spines as though encountering an unfamiliar species of quiet. Evelyn watched him with restrained curiosity. "You don't come to places like this," she observed. "I don't come to places where no one wants anything from me." "And you think no one here does?" "No one knows who I am." She tilted her head. "That must be liberating." "It's disorienting." They wandered the aisles, conversations emerging and dissolving without effort. Novels that had altered Evelyn's life, Nathaniel's childhood spent dismantling computers instead of reading fiction, the strange intimacy of stories written by strangers. Time loosened, unnoticed. For Nathaniel, the stillness felt almost illicit. For Evelyn, it felt worse. She was acutely aware of the absence beside him. Victoria Langford, whose existence was not rumor, but fact, documented in glossy photographs and engagement announcements, the knowledge pressed against her ribs like a moral weight. "This is dangerous," she said quietly, stopping near a shelf of literary classics. Nathaniel turned. "A bookstore? You, standing here with me." He held her gaze. "We're talking. We're drifting. Is that a crime?" "It becomes one when someone gets hurt." The air between them tightened, dense with everything neither dared articulate. Nathaniel's voice, when it came, was softer. "Do you always measure human connection in potential damage?" "I have to." "Why?" "Because you don't." The honesty landed with unsettling precision. Nathaniel looked away first, his reflection faintly visible in a nearby window, a man revered by markets, undone by a sentence in a bookstore. He searched for a response and found none that did not feel inadequate. Evelyn's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen, a small, involuntary shift crossing her face. "You should answer," Nathaniel said. "It's not important." But he had already seen the name. Victoria. The moment fractured. Evelyn silenced the phone, slipping it back into her bag with deliberate calm. Yet the atmosphere had altered irreversibly, reality intruding with quiet cruelty. "I should go," she said. Nathaniel nodded, though something in him resisted the simplicity of departure. "Will I see you again?" Evelyn hesitated, not because she lacked the answer, but because she knew it too well. "Chance encounters are one thing," she said. "Deliberate meetings are another." "Then let's call it chance." Her eyes held his, conflict flickering like distant lightning. "You're not a man built for chance, Nathaniel." "Perhaps I'm tired of design." For a suspended instant, the world seemed to narrow. The muted rustle of pages, the rain-softened light, the fragile gravity of proximity. Desire did not announce itself loudly. It unfolded in the silence between words, in the awareness of what could exist if circumstances were different, which they were not. Evelyn stepped back. "Good night, Nathaniel." He watched her walk toward the door, the bell's soft chime marking a departure that felt disproportionately significant. The city's noise rushed in as she disappeared into the mist, leaving behind the faint scent of paper and something far more unsettling absence. Nathaniel remained motionless among the shelves, surrounded by stories of impossible loves and irreversible choices. For the first time in years, he did not feel in control of the narrative. November arrived with a quieter cold, the kind that crept beneath coats and into decisions people believed were temporary. Nathaniel Cross had never been a man prone to distraction. His days were engineered down to 5-minute increments. Investor briefings, product forecasts, regulatory calls spanning continents. Precision had built his empire. Control had preserved it. And yet, control had begun to erode in the most unremarkable moments. It was a message on a Tuesday evening. "Evelyn Harper, you left your book." He stared at the screen longer than necessary, the city unfolding beneath the glass walls of his office. The novel, a worn copy of Never Let Me Go, had indeed been forgotten during his second visit to the bookstore, an encounter neither of them had acknowledged as deliberate. "Nathaniel, did I?" The reply came minutes later. "You did. I suppose this is how chance works now." He should have smiled at the irony. Instead, something warmer and far more dangerous stirred beneath his ribs. They met the following night. Not at the bookstore, That would have felt too intimate, too revealing. Instead, a quiet wine bar in the West Village where candlelight softened edges and anonymity felt plausible. Outside, the streets shimmered with the afterglow of rain, pedestrians moving like blurred brushstrokes against neon. Evelyn was already there when Nathaniel arrived, seated near the window, fingers loosely wrapped around a glass she had barely touched. She looked up as he approached, her expression composed yet faintly guarded. "You're becoming predictable," she said. "I was under the impression unpredictability was frowned upon." "Not frowned upon, just rarely harmless." He slid into the chair across from her, the small table an insufficient barrier against the awareness that had begun to haunt them both. For a moment, neither spoke. The bar hummed with low conversation, the muted clink of glassware, the illusion of other lives unfolding safely. Nathaniel nodded toward the book resting beside her. "So this is my collateral." Evelyn's gaze lingered on it. "I considered keeping it, and depriving me of my literary education, and depriving yourself of an excuse." The words settled between them, charged with recognition neither attempted to deny. Their conversations had grown easier, drifting from literature to childhood to the peculiar exhaustion of adulthood. Nathaniel spoke more than he intended, surprising himself with fragments of honesty rarely granted to anyone outside contractual necessity. "My world," he said at one point, tracing the rim of his glass, "is very loud." Evelyn studied him. "Noise isn't always sound." "No, it's expectation and obligation." He met her gaze. "You say that as if you understand." "I edit authors for a living," she replied. "Everyone is writing a version of themselves they think the world will accept." "And you?" "I spend my life correcting illusions." Something shifted then, not dramatic, not visible, but unmistakable. A subtle gravity pulling them beyond conversational safety. Nathaniel felt it in the silence that followed, in the way Evelyn's eyes did not immediately look away. It was Evelyn who broke first. "This is a mistake." "Talking? Pretending this is only talking?" Nathaniel exhaled slowly, the practiced calm of a negotiator failing him. "No one is being hurt." The sentence sounded convincing. Almost. Evelyn's expression tightened, not with anger, but with something far more fragile. "That's a dangerous thing to believe." "Is it untrue?" "Yes," she said softly. "It's just not immediately visible." He could have retreated then. He should have. But desire rarely announced itself as recklessness. It disguised itself as inevitability. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Nathaniel said. "Want has very little to do with consequence." Their eyes held conflict, restraint, the quiet recognition of a line already dissolving. The bar's noise receded into a distant blur, the city itself seeming to pause at the edge of decision. Nathaniel reached across the table. The movement was unhurried, almost tentative, as though granting her time to pull away. His fingers brushed hers, a contact so slight it might have been accidental, yet neither pretended it was. Evelyn's breath caught. For a suspended instant, the world narrowed to warmth and proximity, to the unbearable clarity of what existed beneath weeks of carefully measured words. Nathaniel felt the tremor in her hand, the fragile tension of someone standing at the precipice of her own principles. "We can stop," he said quietly. It was both an offer and a lie. Evelyn looked at their joined hands, then back at him. In her eyes flickered the full architecture of her resistance morality, caution, the knowledge of Victoria Langford's existence like an unyielding fact. "This doesn't end well," she whispered. "Not everything has to end tonight." Rationalization, smooth, seductive, catastrophic. The first kiss was neither urgent nor theatrical. It unfolded with a kind of hesitant gravity, as though both understood the magnitude of what they were allowing. Nathaniel tasted wine and restraint, the faintest tremor of uncertainty. Evelyn felt the quiet devastation of recognition that desire, once acknowledged, rarely retreated intact. When they parted, the world did not shatter. It simply continued, which somehow made it worse. "I shouldn't have done that," Evelyn said, though she did not move away. Nathaniel's voice was low, unsteady in ways he barely recognized. Neither should I. And yet, and yet, outside, the city breathed in indifference. Later, in the muted privacy of Nathaniel's downtown apartment, Manhattan stretched beneath them in a sea of fractured light. The space was vast, immaculate, impersonal glass, steel, curated art devoid of fingerprints. Evelyn stood near the window, arms folded, acutely aware of the unreality of her presence there. "This is still a mistake," she said. Nathaniel approached slowly. "You're still here. So are you. Does that make it inevitable?" "No," Evelyn replied. "Just human. There are moments in which morality does not collapse dramatically, but yields quietly, almost tenderly beneath loneliness, longing, the intoxicating illusion of being seen." Nathaniel, who had spent a lifetime mastering outcomes, surrendered to something far less negotiable. He convinced himself of a gentler narrative. No one would know. No one would suffer. This was not betrayal, only complexity. Not destruction, only desire. Evelyn, even as she responded to his touch, sensed the fragility of those rationalizations. She understood the architecture of illusion better than anyone. Yet understanding did not grant immunity. Later still, wrapped in the trembling stillness of aftermath, Evelyn lay awake while Nathaniel slept beside her, the city's glow tracing pale lines across the ceiling. In the silence, reality returned with merciless clarity. "This changes everything," she thought. Beside her, Nathaniel shifted slightly, his expression unguarded in sleep, a man momentarily free of expectation, unaware of the fault lines already spreading beneath the surface of their lives. In the distance, sirens wailed, a sound as constant and indifferent as consequence itself. Neither of them slept peacefully again. Winter did not arrive all at once. It edged into the city like a rumor, mornings sharper, evenings reluctant to warm, the sky paling into a tired metallic gray. Manhattan adjusted without sentiment. People layered coats over unresolved lives and continued forward. Evelyn Harper counted days. It began as a faint unease, a quiet irregularity she dismissed with the practical logic of a woman accustomed to stress. Deadlines accumulated at Halcyon, authors demanded reassurance, sleep grew fragmented. There were reasons, sensible, unthreatening reasons, until there were not. On a Thursday morning, she stood alone in her apartment bathroom, the radiator hissing faintly like an impatient witness. Pale light filtered through the frosted window, washing the room in a sterile stillness. The pregnancy test rested on the edge of the sink, its verdict already delivered. 2 lines. The world did not tilt or fracture. It simply narrowed. Evelyn stared at the result, her mind refusing immediate interpretation. There was only the distant hum of traffic below, the muted thud of her own pulse, the surreal clarity of a life divided into before and after by something smaller than a pen. "No," she whispered, not denial, but astonishment. Her reflection offered no guidance. The same dark eyes, the same face, and yet everything had altered with terrifying precision. Fear arrived first, then something far more disorienting, a fragile, involuntary flicker of wonder. A child. Not an abstraction, not a theoretical consequence, a presence already unfolding, silent and absolute. Evelyn sank onto the closed lid of the toilet, fingers trembling against cold porcelain. Images collided without order. Nathaniel's unguarded smile. Victoria Langford's immaculate composure. Headlines she could already imagine with nauseating clarity. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, as though the gesture might anchor reality. "This is impossible," she murmured, but her body, indifferent to moral geometry, disagreed. Nathaniel Cross was reviewing acquisition projections when his phone vibrated. He almost ignored it. The boardroom's glass walls framed a skyline washed in winter light, executives arranged in attentive stillness. Numbers flowed across the screen before him, expansions, valuations, the language in which his world operated with ruthless coherence. The second vibration fractured his concentration. Evelyn. A pause. Barely perceptible. Catastrophic. "Excuse me," he said, rising with practiced composure. In the corridor, the city's noise felt distant, muffled by altitude and insulation. Nathaniel answered. Evelyn? Silence. Not absence, breath, faint and uneven. Can you come over? She asked. 3 words, stripped of inflection, heavy with implication. Something cold slid through his chest. Is everything okay? Another pause. No. He was already moving. Evelyn's apartment carried the subdued intimacy of a life lived alone. Books stacked in imperfect towers, a half-wilted plant near the window, a mug abandoned beside an open manuscript. The ordinary details felt almost cruel in their normalcy. Nathaniel stood just inside the door, coat still on, uncertainty rare and visible in his posture. What happened? Evelyn did not answer immediately. She sat at the small kitchen table, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had blanched. The silence stretched, dense with everything language resisted. Then she slid the object across the table. Nathaniel looked down. The pregnancy test. For a suspended instant, comprehension refused to assemble. The plastic device seemed absurdly mundane, incapable of carrying the weight abruptly pressing against his ribs. He exhaled. Once. Twice. His voice, when it emerged, was barely recognizable as his own. Is this... Yes. The word landed without drama, without mercy. Nathaniel lowered himself into the chair opposite her, movements unsteady in ways he did not attempt to disguise. The city continued beyond the window, indifferent to the tectonic shift occurring within a rent-stabilized apartment. Neither spoke. Shock possessed its own silence, vast, disorienting, almost sacred. Evelyn watched him, searching his face for something she could not name: fear, joy, regret, any definitive emotion that might stabilize the moment. Instead, she saw calculation. Not coldness, not cruelty, but the unmistakable machinery of a mind confronting consequence. I didn't plan this, she said quietly. Nathaniel's gaze lifted, pained. I know. I was careful. I know. The repetition felt unbearable. And yet, Evelyn whispered. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair, a gesture stripped of its usual control. Are you sure? The question, though rational, cut with surgical precision. Evelyn's eyes flashed. Yes, Nathaniel. I'm sure. I didn't mean I know what you meant. Silence again, now threaded with something sharper, more fragile. Nathaniel stared at the test as though it might revise itself under sufficient scrutiny. A child. His child. The thought expanded with terrifying speed, colliding with boardrooms, shareholders, Victoria's family, the meticulously engineered architecture of his public life. This is... he faltered. Complicated? Evelyn supplied, a brittle edge beneath the word. Yes, it's also real. He closed his eyes briefly. I need to think. The sentence altered the air. Evelyn recoiled almost imperceptibly, the smallest physical manifestation of an internal fracture. Think? This affects everything. It affects me, she said, voice tightening. It affects a life that already exists. I'm not denying that. It sounds like you are. Nathaniel's gaze snapped to hers. That's not fair. Fair? Evelyn echoed, disbelief flickering like static. There is nothing fair about this. The radiator hissed. A car horn wailed distantly. The ordinary sounds of the city pressed against an extraordinary impasse. Nathaniel leaned forward, voice low, urgent. I'm trying to be responsible. To whom? The question lingered, merciless in its simplicity. Nathaniel hesitated, which was answer enough. Evelyn's chest tightened, a quiet devastation unfolding behind her ribs. Victoria. She's part of my life. And I'm not? You are. Differently. The words struck like a physical blow. Nathaniel immediately regretted it, but language, once released, refused retrieval. He reached for her hand. She pulled away. I didn't ask for this situation, he said. Neither did I. I just need time. Evelyn laughed softly, a sound devoid of humor. Time is a luxury my body is not offering. He flinched. Outside, snow threatened in the colorless sky. I care about you, Nathaniel said, the confession sounding inadequate even to himself. Evelyn's eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. Caring is not the same as choosing. The truth of it hollowed the room. In the days that followed, something subtle and corrosive took root. Nathaniel called less frequently. Each conversation weighted with an invisible tension. Words grew cautious, then scarce. Promises, once fragile but present, dissolved into ambiguities. I'm working through things. We'll figure this out. Just trust me. Evelyn recognized the shift with mounting dread. Silence, she knew, was rarely neutral. It was the language of retreat, of conflicts deferred until they calcified into inevitabilities. One evening, as dusk bled into the city's fractured lights, Evelyn sat alone on her couch, phone resting inert beside her. The apartment felt smaller now, air thick with anticipation and fear. She pressed a hand against her abdomen again, the gesture no longer abstract. "I won't pretend you're not here," she whispered into the quiet. Across the city, Nathaniel stood before the vast windows of his penthouse, Manhattan glittering with indifferent splendor. His phone lay face down on the marble counter, Evelyn's last message unanswered. He told himself he was thinking, being careful, preventing harm. Yet beneath the rationalizations stirred a more unsettling truth, that hesitation itself was a choice, and silence, once begun, possessed a momentum all its own. The city, as always, remained unmoved. December arrived dressed in glass and frost. Manhattan glittered with the manic optimism of the holiday season, storefronts blazing in gold, trees threaded with impossible light, strangers briefly softened by ritual cheer. Beneath it all, lives continued their quiet unraveling, invisible and relentless. Victoria Langford believed in order. Not the naive kind, but the cultivated precision of someone raised within systems that rewarded composure and punished unpredictability. Her world was a geometry of expectations. Charity boards, gallery openings, foundations bearing family names older than most buildings around them. She wore elegance the way others wore instinct. And lately, something had begun to misalign. Nathaniel had grown distant in ways too subtle for accusation, yet too persistent for dismissal. It was not absence he attended functions, answered questions, occupied space beside her with the same measured grace. But presence had acquired a strange hollowness, as though some essential current had shifted elsewhere. Victoria noticed everything. The delayed replies, the distracted silences, the gaze that sometimes seemed fixed on something beyond the visible room. She did not confront him. Not yet. Victoria understood the danger of appearing insecure. In her world, doubt was handled privately, like a stain one removed before guests arrived. Until curiosity, sharpened by instinct, found its opening. It happened on an unremarkable Tuesday evening. Nathaniel's phone rested on the kitchen counter of their shared Upper East Side residence, vibrating softly against marble. He was in the shower, water cascading in steady white noise. Victoria stood nearby, flipping through a seating arrangement for an upcoming foundation dinner, attention only half engaged. The screen lit, a name. Evelyn Harper. No photograph, no identifier, just two words that meant nothing and suddenly everything. Victoria did not move at first. The phone vibrated again, insistently intimate. She stared at it, a curious stillness settling into her spine. There are moments in which intuition outruns evidence, in which the body recognizes threat before the mind consents to interpretation. The third vibration broke the silence. Victoria reached for the phone. She did not consider it a violation. Not truly. Engagement, after all, implied transparency. Or so the logic went. The message preview glowed, indifferent to consequence. "We need to talk. I can't keep doing this alone." The air altered. Victoria's pulse did not quicken. Her breath did not hitch. Years of social conditioning held the exquisite discipline of someone trained never to fracture where anyone might see. But something cold and razor-sharp slid beneath her ribs. She unlocked the phone. The thread unfolded with quiet brutality, weeks of messages stripped of ambiguity, language saturated with an intimacy that required no explicit confession. "I miss you. Are you okay? I wish you were here. I'm scared, Nathaniel." And then, the final incision. The doctor confirmed it today. Victoria's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the device. Pregnant. The word did not appear. It did not need to. Water continued running behind the bathroom door. The apartment hummed with curated tranquility, muted lighting, soft instrumental music, the architecture of a life designed for permanence. Victoria placed the phone exactly where it had been. Then she waited. Nathaniel sensed the shift immediately. Victoria stood by the windows when he emerged, city lights refracting in the glass behind her. She held a glass of wine, untouched. Her posture was immaculate, as always, yet the air carried a density he could not name. Victoria? She turned. Her expression was calm, not the warmth of affection, but something far more unsettling, controlled, precise, devastatingly composed. How long? She asked. The question landed without context, yet its meaning detonated instantly within him. Nathaniel froze. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't, Victoria said softly. Not anger, not accusation, something infinitely colder. I saw the messages. Silence collapsed into the room like a structural failure. Nathaniel's chest constricted, the familiar machinery of explanation scrambling for coherence. Victoria, I can explain. I'm sure you can. Her voice remained level, each syllable honed to surgical clarity. That's one of your more impressive talents. It's not what you think. Victoria's eyes, sharp as cut glass, held his. That sentence should be removed from the English language. He took a step forward. Please. How long, Nathaniel? The question again, now inescapable. Months. The honesty, dragged reluctantly into air, seemed to drain the room of oxygen. Victoria nodded once, absorbing impact without visible fracture. And she's pregnant. It was not a question. Nathaniel's silence answered. For a moment, nothing moved. The city pulsed beyond the glass, horns and sirens rising in indifferent counterpoint to the quiet devastation unfolding within a multi-million-dollar apartment. Victoria set her wine down with deliberate care. I want you to understand something, she said. Nathaniel could not speak. I am not going to scream. Each word fell with glacial precision. I am not going to throw things, or cry, or grant you the emotional theater that might make this easier for you. Victoria, you had an affair. The statement was delivered like a financial fact. You lied, repeatedly, systematically, in my home, in my life. Nathaniel flinched. I never meant to hurt you. The faintest flicker crossed her face. Not pain, but something closer to disbelief. Hurt? She repeated quietly, as though this were a minor injury. It was complicated. Yes, Victoria replied. Betrayal often is. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, composure disintegrating by degrees. I didn't plan for any of this. No one ever does. Her gaze did not waver. Does the board know? The question stunned him. What? Your board, investors, the people who believe you are a monument to discipline and judgment. This is not about business. Victoria's laugh was soft, utterly devoid of humor. Everything about you is about business. The words struck with merciless accuracy. You built an empire on risk calculation, Nathaniel, and yet you gambled the one variable you could never fully control. She paused. A human being. Nathaniel's voice broke. I love you. The silence that followed was annihilating. Victoria regarded him with an expression almost tender in its sorrowful clarity. No, she said. You love the version of your life that required me. The truth of it carved through him. And what about her? Victoria continued. Is she also an abstraction in your equations? Nathaniel's mind flooded with Evelyn, her quiet strength, her fear, the child. Guilt and longing collided with terror, obligation, and something darker, the sudden awareness of consequences no longer containable within private space. This cannot become public, he murmured. Victoria went very still. There it was. Not remorse, not heartbreak, image, reputation, the architecture of perception. Her voice, when it emerged, was barely above a whisper. Of course. Nathaniel looked at her, stricken. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Outside, snow finally began to fall, soft and indifferent. Victoria straightened, every inch the woman the world believed her to be, poised, untouchable, forged in the unforgiving furnaces of status and pride. "You don't get to manage this like a crisis memo," she said. "I am not a liability to be contained." "Victoria, please. You will tell me everything, not a demand, an inevitability." And then, she added, eyes like winter itself, "We will decide what collapses." Across the city, Evelyn Harper sat alone in her apartment, phone silent, unaware that the fragile secrecy sustaining her impossible life had already begun to fracture beyond repair. Manhattan shimmered under falling snow, beautiful, cold, unmoved. Snow remade the city into something deceptively gentle. By late December, Manhattan had surrendered to winter's pale authority. Rooftops softened under white silence, traffic dulled to a distant hush, and the sharp edges of the world seemed briefly forgiven. It was a season that suggested stillness, though nothing truly paused beneath the surface. Nathaniel Cross did not sleep. In the weeks following Victoria's discovery, his life fractured into negotiations of a different kind, not acquisitions or mergers, but damage control, measured in glances, pauses, and carefully rationed truths. Victoria remained composed with a restraint more punishing than rage. Their conversations became exercises in civility sharpened by betrayal. And always, beneath everything, Evelyn. Her name pulsed at the edge of his consciousness like a persistent ache. He had postponed seeing her, first a day, then another. There were reasons: legal consultations discreetly arranged by Victoria's family, board anxieties, the delicate calculus of reputation. Each justification felt necessary, temporary, manageable. He told himself he would explain, soon. Evelyn Harper had grown accustomed to silence, but this new variation possessed a particular cruelty. Nathaniel's messages, once threaded with urgency and longing, had thinned into cautious abstractions. "Things are complicated right now. I just need a little more time. Please trust me." Trust. The word had begun to feel like something fragile and already broken. Her apartment seemed smaller with each passing day, air heavy with anticipation, and a loneliness no longer theoretical. Outside, the world glittered with holiday brightness, couples tangled in scarves, windows blazing with gold excess, the city performing joy with exhausting conviction. Inside, Evelyn waited. One evening, she sat cross-legged on the floor amid scattered manuscripts, the soft glow of a single lamp pooling around her. Her phone rested beside an open novel, inert and accusing. She pressed the hand against her abdomen, the gesture instinctive now, intimate. "I can't build a life on maybe," she whispered. The words did not feel dramatic, only true. Nathaniel arrived on a gray morning sharpened by cold. He had rehearsed the conversation during the drive downtown, explanations shaped with careful logic, promises reconstructed from fragments of conviction. The city blurred past the tinted windows, indifferent to the fragile resolve forming within him. He dismissed the driver without thinking, footsteps echoing against the frozen pavement as he approached Evelyn's building. Something felt wrong immediately. No light beneath the door, no familiar, muffled movement within. He knocked. Once. Twice. Silence. A thin unease slid through his chest. "Evelyn?" Nothing. He tried the handle. Unlocked. The apartment greeted him with stillness. Not the ordinary quiet of an unoccupied room, but something more absolute, more unsettling. An absence so complete it seemed to hum. The air carried no warmth, no trace of recent habitation. Bookshelves stood half-emptied, the small kitchen table bare. Nathaniel's pulse lurched. "Evelyn?" His voice fractured against the hollow space. He moved quickly now, scanning rooms with mounting disbelief. The bedroom, stripped of its lived-in disarray, closet doors yawning open, hangers skeletal and abandoned. Bathroom shelves cleared with surgical precision. Gone. Not chaos, not accident, deliberate disappearance. On the kitchen counter rested a single envelope, his name, written in Evelyn's unmistakable hand. Nathaniel stared at it, dread and hope colliding with nauseating force. His fingers, suddenly unsteady, tore it open. The letter inside was brief, painfully so. "Nathaniel, I waited for you longer than I should have. This is not punishment. It is survival. There are choices you cannot make without destroying someone. I refuse to be one of those casualties. Please don't look for me. Evelyn. The world did not shatter. It imploded. Nathaniel read the words again, as though repetition might reveal some alternate meaning, some hidden clause undoing reality. But the ink remained indifferent, its finality merciless. He reached for his phone, called, straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. Message after message tumbled out, desperation eroding dignity with each unanswered attempt. Evelyn, please. I'm here. Just talk to me. Silence. The apartment, moments ago merely empty, now felt cavernous, accusatory. Nathaniel sank into a chair that was no longer hers, letter trembling in his grasp. For the first time in years, there was no strategy, no leverage, only loss. Days stretched into something shapeless and punishing. Nathaniel searched, despite the letter's plea. Contacts quietly activated, resources deployed with the reflex of a man accustomed to solving the unsolvable. Yet Evelyn Harper had vanished with unnerving thoroughness. No forwarding address, no digital trace beyond dormant accounts, no explanations left behind for anyone else to interpret. It was as though Manhattan itself had swallowed her whole. Victoria observed his unraveling with a distance both dignified and devastating. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a weary clarity. You didn't lose her, she said one evening, voice quiet as falling snow. You let time do it for you. Nathaniel had no defense left. Regret did not arrive dramatically. It settled, persistent, suffocating, inescapably precise. Nathaniel found it in small things, an untouched coffee cup in his own kitchen, a novel glimpsed in a bookstore window, the unbearable memory of Evelyn's voice threaded with caution he had mistaken for patience. He replayed every hesitation, every deferred decision, each silence he had framed as necessity rather than fear. Success, once a fortress, now felt grotesquely irrelevant. One night, standing alone before the vast glass walls of his penthouse, Nathaniel watched snow descend upon the city in mute, indifferent grace. Manhattan glittered as it always had, radiant, impenetrable, utterly unmoved by individual catastrophe. Somewhere within that sprawling, luminous wilderness, Evelyn existed, carrying a life he had not chosen quickly enough. Nathaniel pressed a hand against the cold glass, breath fogging briefly before vanishing without a trace. Too late, he understood the cruel arithmetic of silence, that what remains unsaid does not disappear. It accumulates, and eventually, it takes everything with it. Time, Nathaniel Cross would later understand, did not heal. It concealed. 5 years slipped past Manhattan with its usual indifference, seasons cycling through glass towers and crowded avenues, each winter erasing footprints that had never truly mattered to the city. Empires rose, startups collapsed, scandals ignited and were forgotten. The machinery of progress consumed everything equally. Nathaniel's world expanded. Crosstech's valuation tripled. His name migrated from financial publications into cultural mythology keynote speeches, magazine covers, a carefully curated image of visionary restraint. He mastered rooms with the same quiet authority, his voice shaping markets, his decisions bending industries. Success, relentless and immaculate. And yet, memory proved immune to scale. There were moments, unpredictable and merciless, when Evelyn Harper returned with devastating clarity. Not as a narrative, but as fragments. The way she paused before answering difficult questions, the stillness she carried like a private geography, the unbearable softness of her laughter in rooms that had never deserved it. Nathaniel never spoke her name aloud, not to colleagues, not to the press, not even to himself. But absence had a persistence that ambition could not erase. The charity gala at the Whitmore Foundation unfolded with choreographed elegance as such evenings always did. Crystal light fractured across polished marble. Conversations flowed in calculated currents. Philanthropy, politics, the familiar theater of wealth performing conscience. Nathaniel moved through the crowd with effortless precision, an organism perfectly adapted to this ecosystem of influence. He was listening to a venture capitalist describe an educational initiative when something, a voice, a gesture, an indefinable shift in atmosphere, fractured his attention. "I'm telling you, it's a small world," a woman was saying nearby. Nathaniel turned without thinking. Across the room, near a towering arrangement of winter lilies, stood Clara Bennett, Halcyon Publishing. Memory struck with physical force. She had changed little, the same quick, observant eyes, the same restless energy softened only slightly by time. For a suspended instant, Nathaniel remained motionless, the surrounding noise receding into a distant blur. Clara saw him. Recognition flared, followed by something more complicated. Surprise, hesitation, the faintest shadow of discomfort. "Mr. Cross," she said as he approached. "Nathaniel," he corrected automatically, though the name felt oddly fragile in this context. "It's been a long time." "Yes," he replied, time compressed, dense with everything unsaid. They exchanged the expected pleasantries, careers, the city's transformations, the hollow rituals of reunion. Yet Nathaniel's pulse had begun its quiet, uncontrollable acceleration. Because beneath Clara's polite composure flickered something unmistakable. Knowledge. It surfaced gradually, as dangerous truths often did. "I left Halcyon 2 years ago," Clara said, swirling her wine absently. "Publishing became exhausting." "I can imagine. The industry eats idealists alive." Nathaniel nodded, though his mind strained toward the question he could not yet form. Evelyn's name hovered at the edge of consciousness, heavy and electric. Clara studied him with unsettling directness. "You look tired," she observed. "I run a global company. That's not the kind of tired I meant." The remark landed with uncomfortable precision. Nathaniel managed a faint smile. "Some things don't change." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "Some things don't." A pause unfolded, subtle, loaded, inevitable. "And then I heard about Evelyn." The world stilled. Nathaniel's breath caught with violent abruptness. 5 years collapsed into a single, unbearable instant. The ballroom's glow seemed suddenly artificial, distant, as though observed through water. "Heard," he repeated. Clara's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering. "You didn't know?" Cold slid through his chest. "Know what?" For the first time that evening, Clara appeared genuinely unsettled. "Oh." The single syllable carried a weight that made Nathaniel's pulse roar. "Clara." His voice tightened. "Know what?" She hesitated, not theatrically, but with the unmistakable reluctance of someone standing at the threshold of another person's catastrophe. "I assumed," she began carefully. "I mean, you were Nathaniel Cross." Clara. The name fractured, raw and unguarded. She exhaled slowly. "She had twins." The sentence detonated without sound. Nathaniel stared at her, comprehension refusing immediate assembly. Language itself seemed to falter, meaning arriving in disjointed, impossible fragments. Twins. Not a child. 2. His vision blurred, the room tilting in a way no market crash had ever produced. "That's not..." He swallowed. "That's not possible." Clara's gaze did not waver. "It is." The city's noise surged back in distorted waves, laughter, glassware, distant music, grotesquely incompatible with the seismic rupture occurring within him. "I would have known," Nathaniel whispered. Clara's expression tightened, something like sorrow surfacing beneath years of distance. "Would you?" The question carved with merciless accuracy. Nathaniel's mind spiraled, memories reassembling under a new, devastating light. Evelyn's fear, her urgency, the quiet finality of her departure, the child he had believed singular. "You're sure?" he asked, voice barely audible. "I visited her once," Clara said softly, "years ago, in Boston." Boston. Reality lurched again. She looked... Clara searched for words. Different. Tired. But also... Also what? Certain. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly, the words striking with unbearable force. Certain. A life he had never seen. Children he had never known. The magnitude of absence became suddenly, violently concrete. Why didn't anyone tell me? Clara's response was quiet, almost incredulous. Evelyn disappeared, Nathaniel. The truth of it hollowed him. And you, she added gently, didn't exactly look like a man searching for domestic updates. Nathaniel left the gala without remembering the exit. Manhattan's winter air struck like ice, lungs burning as he stepped into the relentless current of the city. Traffic roared, snow threatened in the metallic sky. Everywhere, movement, urgency, lives colliding with indifferent velocity. Twins. The word echoed with punishing persistence. 5 years of rationalizations disintegrated beneath a single, devastating revelation. The past, once a muted ache, now surged forward with terrifying immediacy. Somewhere, Evelyn Harper existed, not merely as memory, but as the mother of his children. For the first time in years, ambition fell silent, and something far more dangerous took its place. Hope. Boston greeted him with a colder, more honest winter. The city lacked Manhattan's theatrical shimmer. Its streets were narrower, its light softer, its history pressed visibly into brick and stone. Snow lingered along sidewalks in imperfect ridges, half melted, refrozen a landscape marked not by spectacle, but endurance. Nathaniel Cross stepped from the car with a restlessness no success had ever induced. For 3 weeks, he had moved through life like a man pursued by his own heartbeat. Clara's revelation had detonated something irreversible. Tearing open a past he had spent years convincing himself was merely tragic rather than unfinished. Twins. Children whose existence rewrote the architecture of his guilt. Private investigators, once instruments of corporate due diligence, had been redeployed with an urgency bordering on obsession. Boston had emerged not as certainty, but probability. Fragments of records, a lease signed years ago, a professional trail that dissolved with deliberate care. And then, finally, an address. A modest brownstone in Cambridge, where winter trees clawed bare fingers at a pale sky. Nathaniel stood across the street longer than necessary, breath clouding faintly in the air. The building was unremarkable, its facade weathered by seasons indifferent to human drama. A bicycle leaned against the railing. Children's boots, small and brightly colored, rested near the steps. Children's boots. Reality, once abstract, acquired devastating texture. He crossed. Evelyn Harper opened the door on the second knock. Time did not erase her. It altered her with a precision more painful than disappearance. Her hair was shorter now, falling loosely around a face subtly reshaped by years Nathaniel had not witnessed. There were new lines near her eyes, not age alone, but the quiet etchings of responsibility, fatigue, survival. For a suspended instant, neither moved. Nathaniel felt the world constrict, every rehearsed word disintegrating under the unbearable fact of her presence. "Hello, Nathaniel." Her voice unchanged, devastatingly familiar. Not surprise, not shock, recognition long anticipated. "You knew I would find you," he said, the sentence emerging more accusation than question. Evelyn's gaze held his, steady and unreadable. "I knew you might." Snow drifted soundlessly between them. "I didn't come to disrupt your life," Nathaniel began, already aware of the absurdity. A flicker crossed her face, something between sorrow and exhaustion. "You already did that," she said quietly. The truth of it landed without resistance. "I need to see them." The words trembled with a desperation he did not attempt to disguise. Silence expanded. Inside the house, faint laughter echoed light, unguarded, unbearably alive. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then stepped aside. They were building something on the living room floor. 2 small figures bent over a chaotic landscape of wooden blocks and plastic dinosaurs, their concentration absolute. Afternoon light pooled softly through tall windows, illuminating a world constructed entirely beyond Nathaniel's comprehension. He stopped breathing, because there, scattered among toys and winter light, his children. A boy and a girl. 7 years old, Clara's research had confirmed with merciless arithmetic. The boy looked up first. Nathaniel's heart stuttered violently. There was no mistaking it. The eyes, the improbable familiarity of features genetics had preserved with cruel efficiency. It was like encountering a childhood photograph rendered impossibly animate. "Mom?" the boy asked. Evelyn's voice, carefully neutral. It's okay, Liam. Liam. The name fractured something deep within Nathaniel's chest. The girl turned next, curiosity bright and unguarded. Her face carried Evelyn's softness, yet echoes of Nathaniel's own bone structure surfaced with devastating clarity. This is... Evelyn hesitated almost imperceptibly. Nathaniel felt the air tighten. A friend, she finished. The words struck with unbearable force. Friend. The boy Liam studied him with solemn intensity peculiar to children. You're tall, he observed. Nathaniel's throat constricted. I suppose I am. The girl smiled, disarmingly open. Daddy's tall, too. The world stopped. Nathaniel's pulse roared, vision blurring under the violent collision of love, grief, and a longing so ferocious it bordered on physical pain. Daddy? He repeated faintly. Evelyn's posture stiffened beside him. Daniel, she said softly. The name fell like an unexpected verdict. A man's coat hung near the door. Photographs lined the mantel. Birthdays, vacations, the quiet documentation of a life Nathaniel had never inhabited. In several frames stood a man Nathaniel did not recognize, his arm draped easily around Evelyn's shoulders, his presence woven seamlessly into the children's universe. Understanding arrived with cold, surgical clarity. Of course. Life, indifferent to unfinished love, had continued. Later, in the fragile privacy of Evelyn's kitchen, reality unfolded with merciless precision. You told them he was their father, Nathaniel said, voice unsteady. I told them the truth they needed to grow up whole. They're mine. The words escaped raw, stripped of defensiveness. Evelyn's eyes flashed not anger, but something deeper, more exhausted. They are not property, Nathaniel. I had a right to know. A long silence followed. Then, you had a responsibility to choose. The sentence cut with devastating accuracy. I was afraid, he whispered. I was pregnant. No accusation, only fact. I would have helped. You hesitated. I was trying to protect your life, Evelyn said quietly. The truth landed, inescapable. I protected theirs. Nathaniel's chest constricted under the full, unbearable weight of consequence. You erased me. I survived you. Silence trembled between them, dense with years neither could reclaim. They deserve to know who I am. Evelyn's gaze did not waver. They deserve stability. I am their father. You are their biology. The distinction shattered something fundamental. Nathaniel staggered slightly beneath its cruelty and its truth. Tears blurred his vision, unwelcome and unstoppable. Do they ever ask? Children always ask. And I tell them families are built by love, not accidents of timing. The words, though gentle, carried irreversible finality. Nathaniel left Boston beneath a sky the color of ash. Snow drifted softly, indifferent to revelation. The city moved with quiet persistence, lives unfolding untouched by the private catastrophe of a man who had arrived 7 years too late. From the car window, he caught one final glimpse of the brownstone. Inside, warmth, laughter, a life complete without him. For the first time, Nathaniel understood the true violence of silence. Not merely what it concealed, but what it permanently destroyed. Love, he realized, was not undone by betrayal alone, but by hesitation, by the fatal arrogance of believing there would always be more time. Some losses could not be repaired by remorse, wealth, or belated courage. Some absences hardened into the architecture of other people's lives, and no amount of longing could rewrite them. As Boston receded into winter light, Nathaniel Cross, billionaire, visionary, architect of empires, sat alone with a truth no success could negotiate. He had not been denied a future. He had forfeited it, quietly, irrevocably, long ago.